Stephen, the questions, does God exist? What is consciousness? Do we have free wills, life after death? All of those to me are meaningless compared to the really big question, why is there anything at all? Why is there something rather than nothing?
Well, I agree. I think it's one of the most fascinating philosophical questions. It's always bothered me. I mean, I remember as a child being bothered by this question. As I've matured and studied philosophy, I've become more and more sympathetic to the view that the question doesn't need an answer. Very often when we're asked a question, we know that an answer is required. But in this case, it looks as if an answer is required, but it might be true that you don't need an answer because actually there's something wrong with the question. We need some therapy so that we understand that the question we're asking actually doesn't really make sense, and I have more and more sympathy for that view.
Okay, well, it certainly seems to make sense to me. I had the same experience as a child. The problem is I've never grown out of it. It has never stopped haunting me.
Okay,
because
I'll see if I can apply some therapy.
Well, I need it.
Okay, right. Well let's. I mean, sometimes when we ask. Let me ask you some questions. I know what's north of Edinburgh, and I know what's north of Iceland, but can you tell me what's north of the North Pole?
Yeah, it's just the way you define North Pole that you can't have anything.
Yeah, and if I were to say, well, look, it's 1 o'clock in London, it's 8 a.m. in New York, but what time is it on the sun? Again, it's a kind of, these are the kind of questions which baffle us for a moment. They throw us, they pull the rug out from under us. And the thing about these questions is that they're confused questions, and we can see actually quite quickly that they are confused questions. If we're going to talk about time relative to sort of terrestrial coordinates, and then suddenly you take a step out from the terrestrial coordinates and continue to apply the concept doesn't really work anymore. And it may be that the same is true of the concept nothing. I mean, if you were to say, well, why is there nothing in your cup, Stephen? Or something in your cup rather than nothing. I could certainly provide you with an explanation. If you were to say, what are you thinking about at the moment? I might say, well, nothing particularly. That just means that at this particular moment in time, there's nothing.
I can follow that.
These words have their home within this kind of spatio-temporal setting. And what we're doing is we're attempting to stand outside of that spatio-temporal setting in a place where there is no time and no space, and say, and now there's nothing at all. We're not just removing the substance that was in the cup.
Right.
We're not just we're removing space. We're removing time itself. We're considering the possibility that there might be absolutely nothing.
No laws of physics, nothing.
Nothing with a capital N, if you like. And the question is, actually, do we really have a grasp of that concept? Because we're moving from talk about nothing in one context and then stepping outside and supposing that we still have a grip on it, but do we really?
Look, I think that's a legitimate point, and people Kant talked about that you can ask questions about why questions, things in the universe, but the whole universe as a whole escapes that kind of a possibility. But we certainly can conceive of the question, and the issue is whether it's legitimate or not. And it just, in my heart, it just cries out because I can imagine it. I mean, I would assume that what you're saying is that there has to be something that's self-existing. Is that a natural consequence of saying that the question makes no sense?
I'm not quite sure about that. I mean, what I'm suggesting is that the question itself should be rejected.
Well, let's start with simplicity. There are some things. There are some things, right?
Yeah,
we can agree on that.
Yeah.
And this is here, right. and there are composite things, and then you can go down to smaller, and ultimately, whatever that is, there's some fundamental things, right? And there may or may not be God, there may or may not be this or that physical law. So the question is, how many of those things could you eat? You could eliminate this table. But at the end of the day, is there, once you start what things cannot you eliminate? Because then if the question is meaningless, that you have to be saying that some things, whether it's God or whether it's particles or laws of physics, are self-existing.
Well, you have to say that, I mean, it's true that we can start with the universe and then we can start subtracting things, can't we? So let's take the table away, and then let's take the floor away, and so on. And so we start removing things from the stage, but the stage is the spatio-temporal
Right.
universe.
You have to
the
remove that too.
And of course, now the question is, well, can we actually make sense of the thought of the stage itself being removed? And it's not so clear that we can. And you find that when people often say, well, but what was before the Big Bang? What caused the Big Bang? As if they have a grip on on the idea that there was a before the Big Bang. But of course, that's precisely what's being denied. We're suggesting there was no before. And if there was no before, then the question, what was before the Big Bang, makes no sense. It doesn't require an answer.
Well, that's a physics and cosmology question, and I can assure you there are as many different views among those guys as there are among philosophers. So I'm not sure we make progress. But I mean, when you run the movie of the universe backwards, you do have motion. It's not like this is an illusion, and there is some kind of an answer, whether there's multiple universes before the Big Bang or whether the Big Bang was a round thing and a kind But there has to be something.
Why? I mean, it's not clear. It's just not clear to me that is the case. I mean, we run the clock back. We are now saying there was no before, but we're supposing that we can still somehow make some progress back there somehow, even if in a non-temporal way, to discern the nothing.
You have to have a logical or a so-called ontological, a meaning cause. I mean, because you have a flow.
You have a flow, but we've already admitted that there was nothing before the Big Bang, temporally speaking. So does it require, in what sense does there have to be something back there? It's tempting to say, but look, there's something, and there could have been nothing. And when we're talking about stuff in a cup, you could say, yeah, there's something in the cup, there's some tea, and there might have been nothing, there might have been no tea in the cup. When we start thinking philosophically about the universe, we start to ask the question, why is there something rather than nothing with a capital N, as it were, absolute nothing? We have removed not just the things on the stage, but the spatio-temporal stage itself. And if the notion of nothing with a capital N makes no sense, then neither does the concept of something with a capital S. You can't ask, why is there something? Why is there anything at all? Because you're asking a question which actually helps itself to the very concept that makes no sense, absolute nothing. So it seems to me that the question may not make sense. I don't say it definitely doesn't, but I have considerable sympathy with the view, growing sympathy with the view that there's something wrong with that question, and what we need is not an answer, but a kind of therapy, an explanation that will make us realise why it's time to stop asking the question. It doesn't need an answer.